Could you just unpack for people who are perhaps hearing this for the first time? I think a lot of people we've seen Israel's support has virtually collapsed, but and that's because of the behavior that's going on with the censorship has become so extreme in America. But let's actually give these people a background education like you gave me when you came on my show of what actually Gaza is, what is the history there, what happened to these people in 1948.
I believe the place to begin is 1948. The State of Israel is created. In the course of its creation, about 90% of the indigenous Palestinian population of Israel was expelled. About 750,000 people. Of those 750,000, about 300,000 were expelled to Gaza. And that's when Gaza kind of became Gaza. It was right now of the population of Gaza, about 80% are refugees from the 1948 war or descendants of those refugees. Under international law, a descendant of a refugee is still counted as a refugee. So it's 80% a refugee population. And it's also about 50% a child population. Now, from the moment Gaza came under Egyptian administration, after the 1948 war, Gaza comes under Egyptian administration. It's a very interesting fact when you start going through the history. There are all these outside observers who go into Gaza, either to work there like under the auspices of the UN, or just to see the situation. And one of the things that struck me was each time somebody goes to Gaza, they describe Gaza as a huge concentration camp. Now, this is still under Egyptian rule. So ELM Burns, the main UN official in Gaza, he writes a book Between Arab and Jew. How does he describe Gaza? He describes it as a huge concentration camp. In 1967, during the June 1967 war, Gaza comes under Israeli control. In July 1967, the father of Al Gore, the presidential candidate, his father was also a senator. So Al Gore, or Senator Gore, meaning the father, he goes to Gaza. He comes back and he testifies before the U.S. Congress. How does he describe Gaza? He says Gaza is, quote, a huge concentration camp on the sand, if you will. You now fast forward to 2002. One of Israel's leading sociologists, his name was Baruch Kimmerling, he writes a little book. The little book is called Politicide. How does he describe Gaza? He describes Gaza as, quote, the biggest concentration camp ever. 2004, the head of Israel's National Security Council. His name is Giora Eiland. He's still around. He's active now behind the scenes in the Netanyahu government. How does he describe Gaza? He describes Gaza as a huge concentration camp. Now, bear in mind, this is before Israel imposed the blockade of Gaza. It was already a horror show. It's been a horror show since 1948. In 2006, Israel imposes a blockade on Gaza. It decides what goes in. It decides what goes out. It decides who goes in. It decides who goes out. They put Gaza on what they call a humanitarian minimum diet. You know what that meant? It meant they calculated, literally, we're not talking about hyperbole now, poetry. They calculated the caloric diet of everyone living in Gaza, and they admitted just enough food to avoid scenes of starvation. That was 2006. We're not talking about after October 7th. They prohibited baby chicks from going into Gaza. They prohibited chocolate from going into Gaza. They prohibited potato chips from going into Gaza. They prohibited condiments from going into Gaza. No cinnamon allowed in Gaza. Why? They wanted to create such intolerable conditions that the population of Gaza would overthrow the government that they elected. So that was Gaza. Now, you come to 2006, October 6th, okay? You come to 2006. The Economist magazine, which you know is not a flaming liberal magazine, it describes Gaza as, quote, a human rubbish heap. The leading UN official on Gaza describes it as, quote, a toxic dump. 60% of the young people in Gaza, the people who burst the gates of Gaza on October 7th, 60% of them are unemployed. All they have to look forward to when they get up each morning is to pace the perimeter of this tiny parcel of land, 26 miles long, the length of a marathon, 5 miles wide. That was Gaza. It was exactly what the UN officials said, exactly what Al Gore's father said, exactly what the head of the Israeli National Security Council said. They were born into, they languished in, and they were destined to die in a concentration camp. It was like an elephant burial ground, really. And that was the situation in Gaza. Gaza had vanished from the political scene. By October 6, 2023, all the talk was about whether the Saudi Arabia, would join the Abraham Accords. Nobody was talking about Gaza anymore. And so the people of Gaza basically did what Nat Turner did.